Hey guys, Dustin Witt.
Hey, this is Scott Snyder.
This is Paul Dini.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
You're listening to Bat Force Radio.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, and you're listening to Bat Force Radio, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to Bat Force Radio. We have an incredibly special show today. Obviously, happy holidays to everybody. We got Robin DeCross in Canada.
Hello.
Bat Force Tom in California. We got a couple more guys coming on to say hi because we have a special guest. Robin, is this our fourth annual?
I believe it's the fifth.
The fifth annual.
Yeah, I thought it was the fifth.
The fifth annual Halloween Spooktacular with our favorite guest, Kelley Jones, for this special season. Kelley, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What I love about, at this point with you and with comics in general, what I love about Kelley Jones is even if you're a casual, walking on the street, average Joe, maybe not into comics, but you know art, even that person, if you show him a Kelley Jones like piece, he might not know Kelley Jones, but he knows the Kelley Jones style and he knows the Kelley Jones Batman, and he will say, "Oh yeah, no, I know that. I've seen that." And that's kind of where you're at now. You are a living legend, pretty much.
Well, I appreciate that, Tom. I think if you do it long enough, if you survive all the different epochs and eras, and to your point, probably it is because I kind of work within my own head style-wise. I don't really look at what's going on. I don't really take that in. Not that I'm ignoring it. It's just that I always feel that if something good is going to happen in my case, it's got to come from wherever it is inside that percolates, and that's I don't know how that works. I would love to give a definitive answer on the style on Batman or Sandman or any of those things, but they just sort of come out of nowhere. And if you stick to that, your stuff seems to not date. It still seems to be fresh, at least to newer people looking at it. People who know it know that it at least comes from a sincere place, and there's a lot of energy in that. It's still when I I'm doing a bunch of Batman covers now, and I'm always surprised that they get a hold of me to do it, because there's so many good people now, and the way things look now is much more realistic in that sense, and I'm always surprised. But they tell me they do well. That's number one reason they ask you is you're selling some covers for them, or selling some books. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful to the people who encouraged me to kind of stay that way back when I was starting to do it, in Denny O'Neil and stuff. I mean, he was the one who was really, supportive. It never like, "Hey, I like you're doing these individual things, or this part, or this thing you did." He just would give a general, "I like this. This is to the core of who this character is," and he would just let me go. He would always say, "Never think you're going too far." Not that I would say, "Denny, am I going too far?" But he would bring it up because he'd know I would be aware of that. Because I would see the other guys work at that time, and they were all doing terrific stuff, and it didn't look remotely like what I was doing. So I always used to say, "Are you sure? Are you really sure about this?" And he was very cool. I mean, he kept me on there I worked for Denny for 10, 12 years. So, until he left.
That is, I think, one of the reasons why your stuff is so special is because it is so unique and different. And you're mentioning some covers that you're doing right now. I saw you post this one.
Yeah.
And this is insane. Can you just talk a little bit about?
Well, they wanted they wanted a really good shot, they told me, of the Joker. Just, can you do something with the Joker? And they didn't really have anything specific in mind. And at that point, you're when an editor does the really cool thing of saying, just give us something cool, you know, no direction, just something cool. That's kind of how I came into DC doing covers anyway. So it was a throwback time, and it was an idea that I'd had uh, for a book that didn't come to be with the Joker, and initially it was just him looking in a mirror, and then it was framed really well with the teeth. That was a last second thing where I had it and I went, well, I have this negative space above and below. I should do something with it. And it just bang popped in my mind. It's the reverse smile.
Yeah, absolutely spectacular. This image right here. For those of you who are listening to the podcast version, we have this up on YouTube, so you definitely want to give yourself an opportunity to check it out, because we got a good amount of images that we're going to share. And what you mentioned before about the Twitter that we were mentioning before we got on is that you're on Twitter now. You weren't sure exactly what to share, and this is a perfect example of why it's amazing, because we often see the colored and finished
Right.
product, but we don't see the blacks, the way that you finish it when you're done with it before you pass it off. And I think that's something that fans don't often see, and we love it. Just the raw art that comes off of the artist's hands, the way that they're seeing it. And this is an amazing example of that with the blacks and the inks and look at that, just the maniacal Joker right there.
Well,
Amazing
look,
stuff.
I appreciate that, because what you're basically saying is that there's a lot of emotion in it. And that's how I draw. There's a lot of guys, and especially what you're saying about it being in black and white, because I really don't think about how these things are going to be colored. And so I'm very, with colorists, I just say, well, you know, if I colored myself, it'd probably be very garish. I'm very primary color minded. Um, and so I kind of leave all that stuff up to them. But I kind of agree. I mean, I like seeing stuff in black and white, and um I'm an artist who still works in the original tools and on paper, and uh I kind of hope for odd things to happen. Like, this is one where an odd thing happened, where the shot from inside the mouth, the inside of the mouth was an add-on towards the very end. And I don't think that would happen any other way. But I think it's interesting when I look at it, even after some time I do that, I go, well, where did that come from? You know? I don't know. I try not to think about that too much, because I enjoy the surprise as well. You never know how it's going to go, and you don't know if it's going to look goofy, but boy, it's a lot of fun to do while you're doing it.
That's an interesting aspect to your art that you just mentioned, that you don't think about what the colorist is going to do with it. I think maybe some other artists will create their pieces with the colorist in mind, thinking, well, the color will make this look right. Whereas your goal is to do it all yourself. You're just thinking about, well, I'm going to make this look the way that it should look, and
Yeah.
then the color just gets added to it later
Yeah,
on.
I think it's more fun that way. If I'm a creator, I don't want, I just told you I like going in there with the editor saying do whatever. Well, I don't want to the only thing I ever tell colorists is bright, because I've already done the black is already there, and not to overproduce that black. But anything they want to do from there on out, I'm fine with it. I usually am the worst person to ask about colors in general, because I tend to still think of comics as a very graphic black and white exercise. At least for me, I spend all my time with it that way. I only see it a finished product for a moment when I'm checking it over, and then I'm on to the next thing. But I like other people I'm collaborating with to have the same freedom I'm having. And who knows, a lot of times I'm really surprised. It will look pretty cool to me. But I think I'm most successful when the the only thing they have to do is just not compete with, if I'm doing a dark drawing, don't make it dark. It's okay because I've already done the rest, and let people see all that line work and the power of something graphic. There was a difficult time when they switched to Baxter paper in the 90s, because you went from this nice soaked in even paper to this really bright paper that did not hold things very well. It made things look thinner rather than full. And luckily they've went to a matte kind of a paper now that I always ask for to be printed on matte, because it imitates the old newsprinty regular, what they call crappy paper actually was perfect. I mean, if you look at comics that were printed in that, they just look perfect because they're all even.
Yeah.
And nothing jumps out at you. It's like a record that isn't produced well, drums are too high, bass is fuzzy. But when it's all, that's why people prefer probably vinyl still. It evens it out.
Yeah, even when it comes to the paper that they're printed on, any pages that are that glossy kind of finish on them, you lose the darkness of the darks because it's now shiny and it's not absorbing the light.
It forces an artist then to think less actually than more, and let the colors fill in that, because they're, no matter how good you are, it's going to not look right. So because you don't have that evenness, and the shiny just makes it not look, you can't see the effort. Probably why you guys like seeing these things when the scans I show are like color scans, they're not black and white. So you see all the mistakes but that's how I look at art. I don't look at it in this pristine sense. I look at it that way.
That's the I love seeing, especially the black, the inks, and seeing, because you could tell where you're putting in the, like, just every stroke of black, and you're just seeing the effort. You're seeing the time of the piece.
Well, I like that you see the choices too.
Yeah.
I mean, there are times I'm inking something and I can't speak for other people. And what I'm saying isn't like I'm right, but there's times I'll look at something and I go, I don't like that. And I'll just do a big sweep of black on it. Or there's an area that is dark and I go, I want to work into that. And render in and out of it. And I always think that a comic book should work before it's ever colored. It should, if they print, I always used to think, if they printed this in black and white, would people still dig it? Would they still go for it?
Your stuff, always.
Yes, we need that artist edition.
And so I, at that point, I prefer that it works on that level, because that way I feel like I'm earning my paycheck too,
A good example that I think we can use for, a Kelley Jones, please don't touch, keep it black and white, that you recently posted.
Oh, yeah.
That is,
well, that was one I just did for myself. I've had that in mind. I like, I love Universal films. I still love them, actually more than when I was a kid. But one of the things that I always wanted to do was, I love, and I'll probably do some more of these.
Oh, please.
But I like doing Universal with not based on a model or a photograph or something. I just sort of how I see it, and so it just comes from my imagination, rather than me just doing a heavily referenced piece, because to me, especially with The Bride, I just dug how she looked. I dug the energy in that. She's only in the film about 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah, near the
and
end.
It dominates. You never forget it. So for me, it was just like, if I was drawing it as seriously, if I was drawing it as a comic, that would have been one of the panels. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and this is the exact, this is perfection. Like, I don't need color on this. I think everyone can agree. Everything about this is, this Bride of Frankenstein comic with Kelley Jones, please.
I would do it.
Whoever is in charge of that.
And it wouldn't be just following the stills from the film. It would be obviously the character design would be the same, but it would be how I would do it. Not that it would be better. It's just why then not just publish it as a fumetti or something? But I don't know how much of a market there is for Universal, but there is for me. But I love those, and so I have a few more of those kind of rattling around that I want to do, just so one day I can have them all for myself to look at.
That's interesting. I thought this was something from a project or like a poster.
No,
like
I was. Sometimes you do things. I do, at least. I'll do pieces for myself, just so you stay true to you're an artist. Not everything has to be you're paid and published or somebody is wanting it. It's just for myself. And
that's how we know you're still pure, is that you still love doing this.
I do. Well, you try to retain as much of being that person just before you're hired to do it. That person who had enough skills, but you're not published yet. So you can only get there if you love it. You can only get to that point not knowing you're ever going to be published, but have the skills to be published if you love it. And so every once in a while you remind yourself, do you love it? I still do Christmas cards by hand for that reason, just for the fun of doing it. Now I've done it for so long, people begin to expect it, but it's just the pleasure. It's simply the pleasure of drawing. And I mean, I've said it before, I'm still I'm totally a fan more than I am a pro. I know how to do this professionally. I perform this professionally, but I'm an awful fan first. If I'm working with people who I deeply admire, they have to go through a period of me being goofy around them, and asking them questions and how do they do this? I was terrible with Doug Mensch. I was terrible with Len Wein. Denny O'Neil used to always tell me, now I don't have time to talk, because I would instantly go into, tell me about Green Lantern, tell me about Ra's al Ghul and how I would always do that.
Yeah. Now
Can I
you
give you my
have
address
I was just going to say you've inadvertently alerted all of us to the Christmas card list that everyone will want to be on.
Yeah.
Well, I always do.
Hold on a second.
It started a long time ago, and I just started doing. I wanted to do one based on A Christmas Carol, but I don't like Nice Scrooge. I like Mean Scrooge.
Yeah.
So all of them are based on Mean Scrooge.
Ooh.
Stuff from the story where he's letting people have it and he's being a jerk and everything. And I always used to think, I wonder how people will like this. I like it, but they've really it's a thing that it's whimsical in that Christmas usually is all these nice sentiments, and mine is pay me your money, pay me the money, or I'm not going to donate to anybody, it's all mine, that kind of sentiment he has at the beginning, and people dig that. It's just probably because it runs against the grain.
I can only imagine what your Marley's Ghost looks like. Oh my
They
god!
should be. They're somewhere on Facebook. I published those. I'll show them. I'll probably, when coming up on Twitter, just run all of them. Every day I'll do a different one that I did.
I think there's an opportunity there that you could either have a Patreon or a Substack, where one of the levels is people can get on the for one of the pay levels, get on the
Christmas card list.
Yeah, and
that's very
that's
very Scroogean. Pay me for.
Well, that's it is your profession, to be fair.
Well, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that. I never, I'm never sure how, and that's probably a good thing, I guess. But I'm never sure how anything goes. I never go into it thinking, yeah, they're going to dig this. The only times I may think that is if I'm working off someone's really a great idea, and then I go, well, anyone could draw this. This would be good, you know. Not something aimed at me, but just something good. And there's been where I've been. I know that's true when I've worked with certain writers, and I'll read it and I'll go, this is good. I mean, there's others you have to sort of tiptoe around and do what you can, but on the really, really good ones, I've always felt like, yeah, if I handed this script to 9 out of 10 guys, they'd hit it out of the park. And that's what you look for, something good like that.
Something that a couple of us saw. I'm pretty sure we put it in our group chat and talked about it, that we didn't know we wanted. Now we want it. And I know I think you said it didn't come to fruition. What we're talking about, like, I'd never thought about a Kelley Jones version of this.
Yeah.
But a SpongeBob Kelley Jones horror comic?
I would have, there was that and Popeye that they were floating that. And
oh my God.
And the funny thing with the SpongeBob was that's the most watered down one. They first said, do the scariest, you cannot go too far. So I did one and they said, that's too far. And there's no violence on it. They're just really, but they're probably right in the retrospect because, you know, I did this one and I thought, wow, what if I could have done the other one? But as time went on, I went, no, this is pretty good. For what it is, it's right on the money. And then the same with Popeye. They had asked if I would do, the people doing it, if I would do a variant cover for them. And I'd asked if I could do it in black and white, like the old Fleischer cartoons. And they let me do it and they loved it. And then they floated at me the idea of doing, well, maybe we should do like a Popeye graphic novel. A scary Popeye graphic novel with the goons and the witch and all that kind of stuff. And but as always happens, you know, regime changes happen within the companies and somebody looks at it and goes, we can't do that. You know, that always. And I had felt at that point, just the idea of a scary Popeye or you know, and they stopped making SpongeBob comics. So that's the only reason that didn't happen. But that would have been pretty successful, you know, Popeye in particular, because it has some really scary stuff in it.
Yeah, I didn't think to realize how his body lends himself well to your style as well.
Well, it's exaggerated, and I'm one of those guys who do not. I went as a young artist, and even before I became professional, had learned everything there was to do with anatomy, but I found that anatomy irritated me because it wouldn't conform to composition the way I wanted. But I stuck with it. And finally, when I was allowed to do Dead Man, that didn't matter anymore. It's a ghost. And I found that it was a far more successful result. And when I wasn't feeling like I had to be constrained by that with Batman, not meaning that you do it wrong, but they had to always show his body. I because I was always think of the cape. That's when the cape became his anatomy to me, and it made him much more mysterious to me. And you can only do this by not thinking, well, what will everyone like, but what will I like when I sit there and finish that page that day. My eyes are kind of tired, but when I come back the next morning to start the next one, I always leave it on the board. And if it makes me react in a good way, like, okay, that's good, or that hits me because I've rested my eyes a bit, then that's what I continue doing. Because I have to assume people, again, it's the fan thing. I went to the stores and I bought the stuff that I liked, and you see it with emotion, you react with emotion. You can't stop doing that. And you can't start doing what do you think they'll like. You have to, you know, I did that at the beginning of my career, and it was very successful. So I'm not going to say it wasn't, but it was not satisfying because that part wasn't being served. And then when I finally had that chance, I started realizing that whatever it took to get to that emotion, whatever rules you have to follow or break, you do it. And
Well, you
people
know
will
you're
react.
doing it good. This will be your new level of, whether this hits or not. If it scares and pisses off some conservative Texas moms, you're doing really good.
Well, you know what I find? I find is that you can do that to anybody because everyone has this set of what they think something should be or whatever. Art in and of itself, in a big general highbrow thinking thing, should have something in it that risks offending someone. It
Yes.
has to, or it doesn't work.
Right.
As soon as you back off from that or apologize or do anything, you might as well turn in your art card,
Right.
You have to trust that whatever that is inside is going to speak to someone. And it may not even be that you're speaking to someone now. It can be 20 years from now. They'll look at it and go, wow, this is pretty good. I mean, how many times have you heard the lamentable stories of, Lovecraft died in obscurity and then 20 years later he's become, you have the American Library put out his book along with all the great writers from the US government. Library of Congress publishes him. Now he would have been shocked by that, but he made it for himself, and whatever happens, happens, And I think that's true of so many other people. I've been lucky in that I've had a certain measure of notoriety, but the notoriety should go either way. It should be, I love this thing he does too. I hate the thing he does, and it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Probably what differentiates me from most artists is I don't think about technique and I don't think about a style. I don't think about those things. What I try to do is have the idea and the idea I have to serve, not my style serves the idea. It's got to be that first. That's the only way I would get like a Dead Man, or when I was doing Sandman, I just felt he was too static in the book prior to that. The art was good. It was just a static character. And so I had to do something with it. And I had to start decorating it. And it worked. And that was the second time that happened. So when Batman came along, I wasn't thinking like, well, this will shock people. I was more thinking, well, I got to stick with this idea because it's working for me now. This you come to it that way. And yes, it does bother people. And yes, it will offend certain people. But I've always felt if you do the kind of material I do, there's an air of tragedy in it. So there's a sadness in a lot of these characters. And that's what I identify with. And the red, because I'm not particularly a gory artist, although there's examples of it. I'm more of and when I do break these rules, it's still within the confines of comic book art, but I'm a guy who's still competing with the artists from about 65 to 80, in that period that I was reading comics that were being produced like that. And so those are the artists I grew up with, and they were all so different and they were all so cool. And their stuff still works for me. I mean, when I look at it now, I'm actually in more admiration because there's such a personal sincerity in each one of these guys, even if they're just doing it to pay the rent.
I wanted to ask a question from your comment before, where you started using Batman's cape as a piece of his anatomy. Did you feel like naturally inclined to start playing with the size and the proportions of his ears at that point, or did that come before? Or
well, I just for me I didn't think of him like most people do, where he's in a well-lit situation and you can see all the details. I thought of him as the bad guys would see him. That's who he presents himself to.
Right.
I try not to get into why does he do it and all that. He does it because it's the right thing to do for him. He's not crazy. He's actually very much in control of himself. And he probably realizes the absurdity of doing these things, but in how it would look in daytime. But in the dark and in the night, when you can't get any help and he's coming from you, and that's the shape he looks like in a alley, a hallway, you're wherever, that would be pretty frightening to me.
That would be very frightening if it was like pitch black and the
And
first
I
thing
think
that
of it
comes
like
in the
that.
light is the
If we're
tall
gonna
ears.
do it realistically, I think if they presented it that way, it would be very frightening because he is primarily, to me, a lot of it is just this shape. And for regular people, and that's how I looked at it, because I don't think like a Arkham Asylum inmate. For regular people, if his goal was to frighten you, the goal wasn't to, I'm going to beat the hell out of you and beat you into submission. A lot of these people became criminals because of that. It had to be something more.
Something more
That
paralyzing.
would make them stop. And so it has to be this Old Testament looking angel from hell guy, it's something like that. That would make you say, I'm going to change my life.
So you recently mentioned both Sandman and notoriety. That's something that I wanted to bring up because I have prepared a slideshow.
Okay.
Your cat Hob, as we see here. So
good old Hob.
Yeah, Hob has recently become sort of a Netflix star.
Yes, he has.
Because people may or may not be aware, Hob was your model for Dream the Cat here. This is a page from issue 18 of Sandman, Dream of 1,000 Cats, which recently, as part of the Sandman Netflix series, as a surprise, after the season was dropped, they put out an extra episode that collected brought to life both the short story Dream of 1,000 Cats as well as Calliope into one episode.
Right.
So here is Hob existing in the comics, and then here is Hob on Netflix.
Yeah, Hob's a star.
Yeah, he's
is
famous now.
And it's one of those things that's funny in that they got a hold of me around the beginning of the year saying that they were doing this, and it wasn't part. Initially, they said it was going to be an 11. They were going to sell it as an 11 episodes, and the guy who runs it, I think David Goyer, had said, "Why don't we do it as a special, like an annual, like old comics would have an annual? So we'll run that, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, we'll do an annual. That will be our annual." And they took those two, and it's very kind of the effects people, the ones who were doing that they loved. That was their favorite issue, just as a comic book for Sandman. That was their favorite one, and they had felt it was the gateway one that brought a lot of people in, which is interesting because I told them that's exactly how it was thought of when Neil wrote it. He was coming out of a Calliope was a reflection of him coming out of I think from exhaustion. He was it just had writer's block, and initially the story was supposed to do was a completely different story, and he chucked it. And so he wrote Calliope reflecting on himself, which was a great horror story in and of itself. And then he followed up with something that I thought was interesting. He had just said, animals dream. So he has to be involved in that. And when he wrote Dream of 1,000 Cats, I wasn't slated to do that, but the thing that had happened was several artists had been offered and refused it because Sandman's obviously he's not in it at all. It's just cats. And so when they called me, I was just finishing Calliope, just about done, or I had finished, and they wanted to put me on. At that time, they wanted to keep me in that office. So when they got a hold of me, they said, "Well, Niels would like to know." Karen had said that they both would like to know if I'd be interested in doing another issue. And I thought it would be down the road. And they said, no, the next one, which means we would send it to you pretty quickly. But you may not want to do it. And so as soon as she said, Karen Berger had said, several artists refused it for these reasons, I said, I'll take it. And she goes, don't you want to hear? And I said, well, you can tell me what it's about, but I'm on. She goes, okay, it's just all cats. The Sandman's not in it. It's just all cats. I said, I've got this. It's mine, because the competitive edge came out then. And then she goes, well, can you draw cats? And I said, absolutely, I can draw cats. As soon as I hung up the phone, I went to the bookstore and bought books on cats, because I didn't know how to draw cats. I mean, you learn.
Lying on your resume.
But don't threaten me with a good time. I'm on this.
But yeah, you're looking at a month of just drawing animals is how most are, and reasonably so. But because I did not come up to draw comics, and I didn't think of myself as a comic book artist, and I still don't, in that true classic sense of one, that didn't throw me. That the idea of just drawing cats, what meant, well, then I can really pull out all my atmosphere tricks and try all my lighting tricks and try different camera angles. And when I spoke to Neil, I told him that, and he was so happy, because he says, I'm writing this without human adjectives, human descriptions. I have to come up with new ones, because cats aren't going to say, use terms like we do. He would say, if winter's cold cuts like a knife, the wind cuts like a knife. He can't say that. So he's got to say it's winter sharp. Sharp. It's just the different terms. And because I had just said, I get different camera angles, I get different, all different kinds of stuff that I would get to do that you can't do when it's people. And and so we were on the same page artistically before I ever saw the thing.
And you actually adopted 1,000 cats because of this?
It seems like I live with them. I've got like 9 or 10 of them. So,
and yeah, it's true that in a way Dream isn't in that issue, but he also is in the issue, and you got to draw him in a way that no one else.
And I think he's more so in this than any other issue of Sandman, because he permeates it. It is his true power that these animals dream too. And of course, it's a joke. Get 1,000 cats to do anything, okay?
Yeah.
But one by one they are. So that day will come when it's theirs again. But I love that he will. So what is the true form of Morpheus? Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's very, like, we see things throughout, like, for anyone who's read it, or there was a little glimpse of it.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but
Netflix
I'm all ready for our cat overlords right now. I'm ready for the cat to take over.
But yeah, Dream appears as he needs to for whoever is perceiving him. Like,
Yes,
as we see him when we see how he is perceived by Nada.
Yep.
And it depends when and where in the world he is, and
well, I used to tell them, I used to tell Karen, and I used to say to Neil, I said, I'm going to change kind of subtly how he looks from time to time, because dreams are that way for me. Things change. And I said, I think that would be cool. Everything else has to be what it is, but he can be what he wants. And it's subtle. It can't be overt, and it can't be to the point to where it shocks somebody, but it should be there. And we picked up on that. I mean, that was kind of the fun freeformness of not just doing Sandman, but working in that environment at that time. Comics had a real Wild West attitude. Anything that worked, do it. Anything that seemed from your heart, do it. Editorial was more about making sure that all the technical aspects of a comic were taken care of, deadlines, proofreading, all those kind of things, and that they were entertained by the creative people they were hiring. They tried as much as they could to stay out of it. It wasn't just with Karen's office; it was in Denny's office too. I mean, for me, they just sort of. I don't think I got different rules. They just said, "Do as you see fit," and I didn't do that thinking I get to run crazy. It was with a lot of restraint then. Okay, then I thought hard about what I was doing to make sure I wasn't doing something stupid. And Sandman afforded me to just go to town on it. Those were very pleasurable years because the writers were really geared towards setting you up for very imaginative visuals. I don't know if that goes over well now because things are very realistic, but in those days it was like wide open. Come up with something, knock us out. I mean, Neil had a thing where the Gates of Hell, and he had it as this little like white picket fence, and I just said, "No, it's got to be the Gates of Hell," you know. And he says, "But that's going to be a lot more work. It's a double page spread, and don't I said, "Well, I said you have it where we're all set up for this huge fight, and it doesn't happen." And I said, "If you see a little picket fence, you're not going to think huge fight's coming."
Mhm.
I said, "If you see this horrific, bizarre fortress-looking wall that goes on for eternity, you think there's going to be a big war. So when he goes there and nothing happens, that's a good pull the rug out from under you." And he went for that. It was very, it's one of those things that it was like, oh, okay, that's cool. It wasn't like, oh, let's have a huge meeting and discuss this and a change and will it affect. It wasn't that at all. It was like, okay, we'll just go with it, and great moments come out of that. And the same with him. He would change his, we had decided on how that battle was going to go. And he had said, when it was first just talking about it, he says, "I know this is going to be tough because it's all the demons from hell. And I got to think of how Sandman fights them all." And I said, "Well, Sandman should just bring all the nightmares he's caused. So the nightmares are fighting the demons." And he says, "Oh, that'll be great, but that's going to be a lot to draw." But when it came to the script, he had changed his mind, said, "Nobody's there," which to me was a lot better than a big, huge fight.
Yeah, it's a big swerve.
A lot more frightening. And where did they all go? And why are they all gone? And it started presenting questions that was better than just a simple monsters and nightmares fight. Although that would have looked cool. It wouldn't have been as memorable.
Yeah, it circumvented expectations this way.
It did, and in a good way, not in a way where you're cheated, you feel cheated. It's in a way where it elevated what you thought. And and if as a reader you're going, "Ooh, that's really good." That's hard to do, but Neil did it.
And spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the comics, the unexpected thing was that Lucifer basically closed hell, kicked everyone out, locked the gates, and gave the key to hell to Dream.
Yeah, it's a very Miltonian view that the sympathy for the devil, that he did not choose this. It was fated upon him, and he got tired of it because at his core, he wanted what he wanted, and he still wasn't getting it, and he never would, and nothing would fill that emptiness. And he's got his own issues, and that was, Neil's take on John Milton's take.
Now, as someone who worked on the Sandman that you did, what did you think of the Netflix adaptation?
I thought they were excellent. I thought they kept. I know that there's always now people going to say this is different or that's different, and that's a worthy discussion and a worthy argument. I'm guilty of that too. But as far as the tone goes, I always measure Batman films on, does it have the tone of Batman? I don't care who's doing it. Does it have that tone? From Burton to Reeves to Nolan, does it have that tone? So I did the same thing here, and I felt it completely felt like the comics to me. And I think that it also had the scope that I wondered if they could get the scope of it, because Sandman's not a linear thing. It exists in the past and in the future and in odd little corners everywhere, no matter what. And it felt like that. The one I didn't think they'd be able to do is the cat one. Yeah. I thought when they told me they were doing it, I said, "Wow, is it going to look like a cat food commercial? You follow a cat around." And then when they sent me some of what they were doing and it was animated, knocked me out.
Now, is Hobb getting royalties?
Hob gets royalties.
All right. He's actually paying his rent.
Yeah,
he collects his royalties once every
there's a
100
lot
years.
of fancy feasts coming his way. So
That's good.
no, he's digging it. No, I've always felt that when you go into these things, you don't lessen what you're looking for, but you're looking for that feel you get when you do the book. Now, for those of us who came to things by comic books, nothing will ever reach that because it's in your head. It's that nothing. So I check that at the door. I go, does it feel right though? Was I entertained? And it does work. You can do that if you see Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. It's very different in a lot of ways, character, whatever. But the spirit is so strong that you can forgive it and it doesn't really even need forgiving. It works. The intent is there. And I think the same thing happened. It's probably why Rings of Power didn't do well, because it didn't have that anchor of spirit the way Jackson had. But the Sandman people kept that spirit, and it is very close to what you see. And it worked. I mean, it's one that I watched twice, and on the second go, I enjoyed it just as much.
Yeah. And there was, I think the comics helped this be a thing in the show, because you get that thing where from one story to the next, sometimes it's from one issue to the next.
Yeah.
You get completely different feels, like the change where we go from the John D episode in the diner and how twisted and dark that episode is, and then I think we go next into The Sound of Her Wings, the death episode, and that is as good an episode of anything as you will see, and is so earnest and emotional.
And I think that's why Sandman went from a cult book to a mainstream popular book right around Seasons of Mist, because it did that for a couple years where people go, it's jarring at first when you don't have the same atmosphere tone of something. It's jarring because you don't know what you're going to expect. And they weathered that early years where you're just trying to sell the book, because Neil's an organic writer. It's what struck him. And he used that character for that, as that vehicle. I was that kind of artist at that time too. I was looking for different. The reason I gravitated to horror isn't because it's horror, although I love it. It's that you have a wider range of things you can do than in a superhero type of format. At least visually, atmospherically, emotionally, there's a wider range. And you don't have as much time to develop it, so you got to choose your images. And the same is true for writing. So Neil whatever would strike him at that time. That's why they were all very different when I was getting them as well. And that's much more engaging to an audience. At least for me, it's much more engaging. It's harder to do, and you've got to have a strong sense of who your main characters are. But after that, you take everyone along for the ride. And I think that would be, if there's a toughness to doing it as a television series, is you're not accorded that much patience. Whereas in a comic, you were. And when I remember being on the phone to Neil saying, "Hey, I just finished a signing. It was I was about to start Seasons, and I just finished a signing for Dream of a Thousand Cats." And the line was all over the place. And I would love to think it was for me, but it was for the book. And I could tell him, I said, they can't keep it in stock. The local guys, the guys I know run the stores, are saying it's in their top 10. And it went from, a book we recommend, to a book that they were putting in pulls. Because it went from, you could get it anytime you wanted to, you better get your copy reserved.
Yeah, you had to.
And I said, I know that's anecdotal. I said, but I'm seeing that. And I'm seeing people. It's one of the times too that a book, within that first blush beginning, people were coming dressed as the characters.
Yeah.
I just
And
was
so I said, something happened here with this.
Yeah.
This is really cool. And as far as I'm concerned, you don't change it. You just keep doing what you're doing.
I think there's going to be even more of a resurgence into the interest of the book, because I just went to a Dallas Fan Festival convention over this weekend, and Morpheus actor Tom Sturridge was there, and there were all these people dressed up as Sandman and all the various characters.
Well, I think
And
I can tell you right now, when they reissued the books for mass marketing, not just comic book stores and stuff, sold like a demon.
oh yeah,
And that is new people.
so Hobbs going to get some more royalties.
Hobbs is owed. We all must serve Hobbs. And but it is. It's one of those things where, you know, okay, it still connects. It's what I was saying earlier, that cat episode, the same thing, where people would say, well, just look at this. Because that's what happened with the cat issue. The people on the fence, they'd say, well, just read this one. This is, if you do, you know, who wants to explain 2 years worth of books, you know, or year and a half at that point? Well, that's the easiest way to do it. And that's true of any comic book. You know, I was a big adherent to Doug mentioned when we were doing Batman, of he had wanted to do single issues on a fairly regular basis, so someone could show it to someone else. You didn't have to know 12 other books. You didn't have to know a year's history. It's just Batman beating up a psychotic postman, you know, something like that. So that is a good, it's I think, palate cleansing too. And it's probably what kept Neil on there long, probably after what he wanted to do. I don't think he wanted to go all the way to 75 issues. I think it was going to be shorter, but it was interesting, you know?
Yeah.
Now, when did you get Hob? Was he named for Hob in
Hob
Sandman?
was named, no, Hob was named after, if you're familiar with the movie, because I'm an enormous fan of the writer of the story. If you're familiar with the Hammer film 5 Million Years to Earth, which is the second, I believe, of the Quatermass films. Anyone who knows that stuff, he's a professor, and he's a straight up professor, but weird stuff happens, you know? And in this particular story, 5 Million Years to Earth, while digging a new subway line, they come across this object. And the object is not made of metal, it's made of ceramics, something. Well, whatever it is, it's been there for 5 million years, and it's alien. On the street under above it where they were digging has a long history of very bizarre hauntings. And the street was named Hobbs Lane. So I took it from that, because Hob in England is a nickname for the devil. And they called it Hob Lane because before it was built, it was a bad place. And then they built the street and it still was a bad place. And then they dig it up. But I won't spoil it. Anyone who wants to watch that, it is the writer's Nigel Neal. It's as good as it gets. It's still as good as it gets. And
what was the title again?
5 Million Years to Earth. Came out in 1968. It's absolutely it's on the level of a classic H.G. Wells, and it turns your head. But if you get into Nigel Neal, I think one of the most frightening things ever I've seen, he's involved in 2 of them, and one was an original story he wrote called The Stone Tape, which was a Christmas story for 1972, which is, I believe, on YouTube. And the other is for Christmas, and it's an adaptation of a novel, and it's The Woman in Black, not the later one. Yeah. His for television, I think, is the single most frightening thing I've seen, TV or film, otherwise.
And that was on YouTube too. I remember looking it up the last time you brought it up.
I don't know. That might be harder to find. I saw it on PBS around that time, and it was nerve shattering, as they say. Unbelievably good, and survives reviewing. I remember Bernie Wrightson telling me that he felt sad that there was no horror films that scared him anymore. And I said, well, what about this? Have you seen this? And he said, no, I haven't seen it, but it wouldn't scare me. And I said, okay. So I found a copy and I sent it to him. And all I told him was, watch this. No phones, no lights. Just watch it at night. Put it on TV. Get something, your snacks or whatever, and just watch it. Just let it work its magic on you. And he says, okay, I'll do that. I'll do that. And a couple of weeks later, he said it was the most frightening thing he had seen.
You
And
scared Bernie.
No, I've done that with other Steve Niles, the same thing. I'd said, Steve, when you see this thing, it's going to freak you out. And he says, but it's for TV. And I said, yeah, I know. And it will freak you out. So Hobb came from that guy, that writer. He's written a lot of great stuff. But that one really, 5 Million Years to Earth is, it's a huge story, but it's a small area. It's been ripped off a lot by other writers. It's just such a good idea. And I just love the street, Hobb Lane is great.
So it just became a fun coincidence that
well,
your cat was named after a
black
character
cat.
in Sandman.
Yeah, a black cat, Hobb. Yeah, it is. It's one that I didn't think of as just Hobb Lane, is where it came from.
Something, again, if you guys are not following Kelley on Twitter, please do, because he's offering up awesome little tidbits and also connections that fans make that you were probably unaware of. One thing that I loved is we've always loved your design for Freeze, and you gave us the exact origin of that.
Yeah.
Where Denny O'Neil did not like Mr. Freeze.
No, he did not.
And he tasked you with, okay, show me what you got. Make me like him.
Yeah.
And this is...
Well, I didn't know that he didn't. I was totally unaware of that. And I just thought, as he was the editor, he shepherded all this stuff. And I hadn't seen him for a while, so I'd liked the character. And I had no idea that there was this moratorium against him. So when I talked to Doug had mentioned, well, I don't think Denny would want to do that. He says, but you're more than welcome to bring it up to him. He knew it was one of those things where sometimes when you're being hazed, that's what it was. He wanted to see me go into that lion's den. And so I went in there completely ignorant, and he just said, I'm starting saying, well, I'd like to do this thing with Mr. Freeze. And then he goes, no. I said, we haven't heard it yet. He goes, no, Mr. Freeze. And he gave me this long thing about why he didn't like Mr. Freeze. He thought he was a silly character. He didn't fit, the whole thing. And he was goofy, and he hated him from the television show, and they've never known what to do with him. And because I had this image in my head of what he was like, and my absolute fear of someone freezing you or freezing parts of you, that just was awful. See, I was thinking more of the horror film thing with him, of Frankenstein in a big cold suit. And I said, and he just said no, and that was that. And then a little while later, because I was going back and forth when I said, okay, I'm not going to win this. A little while later, to his eternal credit, he says, look, I feel bad. You just kept, I should, it's just, I just so dislike this character. What do you have in mind? I said, well, I just see him really differently than what you're talking about. And he says, then give me a sketch, give me an idea, send it to me. Because they didn't have scans then. So I had to send it to him. And I'll let you know what I think. So I wasn't going to kill myself on it. So I just got out some markers and did it and gave him an idea. And he called me up a few days later and said, okay, I like this. I like this. And that's where my going my own way helped, because he trusted that. He knew then that I was going to not be like a standard regular mainstream artist. I was going to do something weird. The design was great to him. And he says, okay. And then he told Doug, okay, I'm not going to give you, I still hate the character, so you don't get 2 issues, but I'll give you 1 issue. Doug called me and says, oh my God, you changed his mind. I said, I guess I didn't know that this was a big deal. I was starting to feel bad. And, but Doug wrote a great script that brought back that character. And now he's back in the, Rogues Gallery, or from that time on. They, even though the movie isn't that good, they changed how they were doing Mr. Freeze to this Mr. Freeze, the big armored suit, and not a little guy, but a big guy. And it was one of those things where I didn't because I didn't know comic book lore the way it is. I was a comic book fan, but I didn't know all this stuff. I'm a lot of times unaware of the meanings of things, even though I've done this. I mean, I was very surprised then about a lot of stuff. So he let us do it. And he's not a great editor to me because he did what I wanted. He was a great editor because he could see stuff. Barbara Kiesel, who let me do Dead Man the way I did, was the same way. She would say, your style isn't my cup of tea. Your way of doing things is wonky, but keep doing it because there's something different here. And you really are, you're making me feel something is what she said. And it's not like, oh, I hate it. It's like, this is different and it's unsettling. And I think there's a place for that in comics. Certainly at DC, she said. There's certainly a place for this at DC. And I was just starting at DC.
Yeah.
So it's not that you need your editor to be your fan. You need your editor to kind of be that blocker for you to get downfield, you know? Doesn't mean they have to like you. Doesn't have to mean anything. It just means they see it. And the goal is to get down the field. And that's what they did.
Did you ever
and I was good friends with both of them, so that was fine. But no, I was the opposite of what Barbara liked, and Denny did like what I did, but it went so far that I didn't know if I would ever get work doing. Certainly not big time regular Batman issues. I never thought that.
Did you ever send Denny O'Neil a Christmas card of Mr. Freeze singing "Let It Snow"?
There was one that he was in. Mr. And it was all these. It was Batman. There was a year they had me draw it, and I put Mr. Freeze in it. I didn't think of tweaking Denny that way, but that would have been good.
Something that I think somebody pointed out to you on Twitter that you said you weren't aware of is this design that was, in my opinion, this is my favorite Mr. Freeze design. He looks so scary and so awesome. This design that you came up with. Bruce Timm absolutely loved it, and he took the most prominent example of his Mr. Freeze for the this is from Batman Beyond, where he went full Kelley Jones Mr. Freeze, and he mentions, I think it was like in a DVD commentary where he said, I saw that Mr. Freeze designed by Kelley Jones and I knew I needed to incorporate it. It looked so scary. And you weren't aware of that. This is your Mr. Freeze. That's in the Batman Beyond.
No, and I've never, I've never spoken to Bruce, but I did when they were doing a book on the animation of the show when he was first doing it with Paul Dini. I had so many times in the office said that was the best representation of Batman to me. Films, comics, no offense to everybody there, that's the one. I mean, if I'm to hook people on Batman, not even my own books, I'm like going, and that had gotten back to them. So when they put out the book, they asked me if I would write a thing for it, and I did. And everywhere I've ever went, I've always said how much I dig what they do. And to this day, in fact, I know that they, and I can't show it yet, but I did a cover for them for their bringing back Batman Adventures. And I did a cover for them, and they did the nicest thing where they had said, well, we want you to use Bruce's designs, but draw it in your style. You know, you don't have to do it. You just do it in your style, but in those designs. And that was a lot of fun.
So you're doing Bruce's design, which was based on yours.
Well,
back into yours.
yes, it's a weird incestuous circle. But no, it was really cool to be able to do those characters like that, if only for a cover. Because I've always really dug that. I felt that it got right to the bone of what that world was. 'Cause it's certainly Gotham, and Bruce is a genius.
And I
Not
don't
that he
think
liked what I did, not that he liked what I did, but Bruce is a genius. So it's very kind of him to say that.
I don't think Arkham, the Arkham City, the Arkham Games Mr. Freeze look exists without yours either. I brought up a picture of it here. That's
look,
how he looked in the game.
Yeah, and I've always liked the fact, it's one of those ideas that people can just take and riff on.
Yeah.
To me, it was simply so I could have a very dramatic lighting on him at all time, right? That this uplit thing. The fact that I didn't think his suit should be weak in the least, because if it is, he'll die, right? He's got to be kept cold.
Yeah.
So it should be some kind of like deep sea armor, like if you're going to go down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, that suit's got to hold. And that's what I always thought of it as. So that would give him a layer of protection against Batman, or whoever. And the idea that he would, there's no sound in comics, but I always heard him walking, those thump, thump, thump.
Yeah.
It's like there's a lot with him that was frightening, that he's not a guy who sneaks around like the other rogues do. He kind of, freezes the door, kicks it in, and does his thing.
Yeah, and that went a long way into reinvigorating the character, both how he became in the comics there, what we got of him, the really reinventing of his story from Paul Dini in the animated series, and then how he is with that look that I just showed in the game. He's a different, even in the video game, he's a very different enemy to face. He's very intimidating because he is so big like that, and you really hear his steps.
Yeah.
And because of what his suit is now and what it's capable of, and his intelligence, he's the boss fight with him. The way it works is you can only do each type of attack on him once, because then he learns from it.
Yeah.
And you can't do that again. And
I never saw
makes him
Mr.
very
Freeze.
dangerous.
The other villains were different levels of insane, and I never saw him as insane. I saw him as angry, and his anger, what was always kind of a nice dichotomy, he's burning with rage, but he's frozen.
Yeah.
And so I always saw him as that, and that made him more dangerous to Batman, because the others are crazy. They're just going to keep doing what they do, and that's why they keep doing it. I mean, if Batman says stop it, you should stop it, and they just keep doing it. The only other reason why you would keep doing it is rage, and that's how I always saw him as, very Frankensteinian that way. But it makes him interesting. I generally like having those kind of things in my head when I'm drawing, because it helps the drawing. Deadman I saw as looking the way he did, because though he was forced to deal with our world, he wasn't allowed to be in our world, and it started to affect him the same way terrible addictions affect how people look. But it was or abusive situation, or you're abusing something and it would affect you physically. And since he was not affected by our physics, he could be in any kind of position in the panels, and he would that was it. So it helped the drawing of the character and made him interesting to me, rather than a guy who was following the same superhero tropes, but a ghost. I want him to be ghostly and sad. I mean, that's a sad thing. He can't be part of this world, so he does what but he's tasked with it. So I never saw it as like, oh, that's good. I always thought it was like, God, he can't go on to wherever you're supposed to go. And I used to tell both Mike and Mike Barron and Doug Mensch, when I worked with them, that though that wasn't written in Mike's ideas, I would do it. And Mike said, "Well, no, just keep doing it. You know that it works." And he made him. He continued making him that kind of a tragic character, rather than a superhero who's a ghost. He actually fell into DC's horror characters. At least while I did them. I remember Bernie Wrightson had told me when he saw it, it was one of those ideas he wished he would have had, and that made me feel good. It isn't I wish I drew something away. It was ideas, and it's like I said, it's always ideas. Neil Adams told me that too. He really liked that it was so different than what he never even saw it that way. And I went, well, there's no way to draw like you, Neil. So you know,
you have to take it in a different direction.
Well, you do if you want to stand out. You take a character very few people care about, or you take a character that is absolutely seen by whoever is a very notable artist like Neil, and you do your own take on it and take your chances. It's the only chance you have, because I'm never going to be as good, and damn few are, as someone like Neil Adams. So how else do you stand out? I was very fortunate to know Neil somewhat, and he had said to me how much he really admired my take on Batman and my take on Deadman, because that was his big things too, and they weren't him, you know. And he asked me about it. Actually, with Wrightson sitting right next to me, he asked me where did that all come from, and I told him kind of what I'm saying here, and he really liked that. I said it's just impossible to do you, and people who did, they might have done a good job. It's still in the shadow of.
Yeah, and everyone was trying to do Neil Adams.
How could you not? It's like, I think there's certain guys who come along in their careers. Kirby's one, Adams is one, John Byrne's another, and they create such a shockwave that it's hard not to be within the influence of that. And whereas and that's probably what worked for me, was I did not think I was going to be a comic book artist. I thought I was going to be other things. And I really did fall into this. So I had a lot of other influences. As much as I love comics, I loved film and film directors and how they told stories. So that had a big influence on me, and still does. And so when I get to a point where someone will say something like this, it's hard not for me to say, and these other guys too, but I don't think people will know or will look into it that way. But when someone of Neil's stature said what he said, it was very liberating in a way. I mean, it isn't like, oh, my ego stroked and something praised. It was like, we weren't talking detailed. He was talking ideas. And it was the same with Wrightson. They were talking ideas. That the hardest thing to do is, in any creative form, is come up with the idea. And I've just been lucky. It's what I said earlier. I don't try to figure it out. And sometimes they'll ask me something. I'll go, I'll do it or whatever. And I don't have a clue until I step up to the plate of what I'm going to do. And I know so many guys will sketch and plan and do, and I find that too restrictive for me. I admire it. I wish I could do it, but I can't. The Mr. Freeze is a odd thing for me, because I had to sit down and design it. In my head, I was just going to do it on paper. And that's how I typically do things. I didn't design how I was going to do Sandman or Deadman or even Batman. I didn't say, here's how he'll look. I just sat down and did it. And there's an energy. I live on that energy. But I'm not an artist in the sense that way. I'm not technically good. I'm not commercially good at following those rules, because there's no stakes yet. The stakes of having to sit down, the deadline started, here's the script, let's get going. That level of, and now the curtain is up, you got to act. That's where I'm not a rehearsal guy.
Mm. Your style, I mean, the way you describe it makes perfect sense because, you know, you don't normally sit down and do a sketch and design. You sit down and you let yourself just go across the page, and the art definitely shows that. Like this is an explosion. This is an explosion of vision onto the page that is not constrained at all by, oh, I need to keep it this or I need to keep it that. This is
Yeah.
just you exploding onto the page. And I think that's why it's so exciting. Your stuff is so exciting to see.
Well, I appreciate that. And a lot of what I do is I'm very big on the one thing I spend a lot of time on is composition. And whether it's a cover or even panels on a page, I try to compose them to where they're visually interesting before I really even get the drawing going. And that's something that I inherently, not that somebody said it, but I found the artists I really started to like were doing that. Now a lot of artists talk composition, but the ones who did it so well, I love Frank Frazetta's work, but when I got old enough to think about it, it was these compositions. They're just beautifully composed. No matter what they work on the canvas and in the visual space, they just work. I mean, even if you just outlined it and you saw none of the detail we did, it works. It's musical, and that's what I try to do. Is the underpinning of my work is composition.
It's very rare we're so familiar with your work. We're so familiar with the characters you've done. It's rare for me to stumble across something that I've never seen you do, and it excites me because of that. And something that, like, my worlds collided doing research for this episode was I saw this piece by you, which I had never seen.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. Speaking of Mr. Freeze thundering around, making noise, can you tell us a little bit about you? This is just such a gorgeous Sasquatch Bigfoot piece. Can you just talk about?
It was one, again, I did for myself. It's one of those that I wanted
even better.
to do. And when I was a kid, my parents had a place up in North Lake Tahoe, and it's still fairly remote, and it was it was backed up onto federal land, so no one was ever going to build up there or anything. It was pretty primal. And I remember as a kid that one of the people who lived near us, all the cabins were fairly remote, but one of them that did live near us was a high school teacher, and one of the things he did was taught cross-country skiing to the students at the local high school. One, it was fun, and the other, it's good to know that when you live in places like that you can get around without machines and roads. And I remember I was out with my father, and we were doing something out in the front, and it had snowed pretty good. And I was like I said, a pretty young kid. And he came up and asked my father, or just started talking to my father, that he was cutting trails and to teach these kids, take them on a big, long 20-mile thing. And he went with his dogs, and he said he was out in the middle of nowhere, kind of going where he wanted, and he came across these tracks, which would be, Bigfoot tracks. And he was asking my father if he'd ever seen anything like that or anyone around, but they were like people prints. They weren't like snowshoes. And his dogs wouldn't go any further. And they just quit. And he said, I don't know. He says, this is the strangest thing. My dad says, I have no idea. No, we don't see anyone. You have to come up this one lane in the real deep forest. So you can't like walk around it. You have to follow this, even though there's 10 feet of snow, you got to follow the road, even if it's not that good. And that was that. And so I asked my dad, what is he talking about? And my dad just very casually said, well, there's people who say they've seen a big guy, big hairy man. And I went like, and I'm thinking a guy who hadn't cut his hair. And he kind of said, no, something like this. Well, it described kind of a Bigfoot guy. And, I don't think my dad believed it, or one way or the other, but he did take this guy seriously. And this guy wasn't saying Bigfoot. He never said that. And later on, when I got older, I asked my dad about that. I said, do you remember that? He says, yeah. He says, I think there was something there. You're off in the middle of nowhere. There's probably, and at that time, this is the early 70s. It was really bizarre. It stays in your head. Luckily, I'd never seen, you didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything. You just this story. And then about a year or so later, the film Legend of Boggy Creek came out. And a bunch of the kids, we all went to the matinee theater, and it was playing with something else. I don't remember the something else. I just remember that was scared the hell out of us. And at that point, I went, that's what this guy was talking about. This is in a swamp, but he was talking in the mountains. This thing was in the mountains. So it just always stayed with me, And as I've lived here in Northern California and in the foothills, you will occasionally hear people say, yeah, there's something to it. I mean, they're credible people. They're not saying this. They're just saying, yeah, there's something to that. It's too big of a place. And it is. The Sierra Mountains are gigantic. I'm not talking their height, their width, and the chain itself. And they're very, very... you do not get off the main roads, not out of fear of Bigfoot, but you don't get off the main roads because you will not make it, you stay on the main roads because they're very treacherous. And and they're treacherous because they're obscure and canyons and stuff like that. So you just, for that reason alone, not because there's a Bigfoot dude, but you hear that all over Northern California, even down to wherever the mountains are, you'll hear it. Just is. So it's stuck in my head, and who the hell knows? And it just made an interesting drawing to me. And any of the descriptions of him, they're always kind of the same. So I just did it. Well, what if I I always think like, well, if I saw it, would I be one of those guys who could draw a good picture of it?
Yeah. It's funny because Gimlin, the Patterson Gimlin, one of the dudes, it was his 91st birthday this week.
Yep, it was.
Yeah.
I'm friends with Lyle Blackburn, and I always ask him. I'll send him things like I'm just so curious about it. But up where I am, I think the power of it to me was how I heard it. I didn't see anything, whatever. It's just a guy asking my dad, was there somebody around? And it is a very thick forest where we were, and a lot of snow, a lot of powder snow. You just don't walk around. You stay, and even when they plow, it's still the roads stink. But nobody came up past us. And this guy's cutting it first thing in the morning. I always wished in a situation like that, you always wish that you go back and take a picture of the tracks or measure the tracks. But nobody thinks like that. It was early 70s. You just don't think that way.
Yeah, you just implanted the seed.
And probably my mom yelled at my dad, "Don't scare him with big monsters in the forest." Because I used to go, as ignorant as you were then, I was pretty good at doing that, and I used to go off into the woods all by myself all the time. You figure out how to get around. I probably had more to worry about with mountain lions.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, because those are all over the place.
And there's I just realized that something they do is, I'm not sure what it is or why they do it. Something about like having to report or what, I don't know what, but there's a lot more big cats in areas that supposedly they're not native to, but they don't report them. Something to do with, I forget what policies.
Where I live is at the base of the foothills, and they've been at the end of our street.
Oh my God.
And there's some ravines where the water, they channel the water, and they follow the ravines. It's where they follow the deer. So it's one of those things where they're there. I mean,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time down at the North Coast, above about 60, 70 miles above San Francisco, and you'll hear them at night.
Oh my God.
I mean, you can hear them roaring. It's a weird sound, and it's their land. It's theirs. So you just are aware of it. I mean, they do tell people, be armed or be careful when you're out in these rural places.
Right.
And you're foolish if you aren't, because you're a potential meal.
Yeah.
I don't know that this was the same area, but I saw this picture, and it was as part of an article. But one of the two Olsen twins, when she goes hiking, she has in one hand a bottle of water, and in the other hand a machete.
Yeah, something. They'll like a lot of people you'll see have not walking sticks, but they're heavy implement.
Mm-hmm.
They're more than just a walking stick, and you're
Mm-hmm.
foolish not to,
Mm-hmm.
because you also have pretty healthy sized bobcats here. You have in certain areas bears. California, people think of it as LA or San Francisco, but most of it is extremely rural and remote. The vast majority to the north is very remote, and you go into the mountains and you will you're a fool to get off the main roads.
Mm-hmm.
So could something like this exist? Absolutely. I mean, it's so remote. I mean, from time to time, a few years ago, they came across a plane crash up in the high mountains. It was a World War II era. It was so cold and dry up there, the body had preserved, and it was a pilot in a training mission, and no one knew, but there it is. And what is it? They're just saying in California alone, there's like a couple hundred plane crashes. They've never found them.
Whoa,
man!
It's just the forests are so dense.
Wow.
And I've lived in them, and they are dense.
Filled with real monsters.
With something there.
Yeah. Before we let you go, obviously it is the season, and this is something else you posted on your Twitter, which is just like, I think you said it was supposed to be a possible T-shirt idea. And
it was. It was Preview Magazines. Preview Magazines put it out a couple years ago. A friend of mine I grew up with.
Yeah, the Halloween Comic Fest was what that was for.
Right. And a friend of mine who is the editor of Previews Magazine is Marty Grosser. He's a fella that I met him. He worked at the comic book store I was going to as a kid. We were both kids. And eventually he moved back east and took that job, and he's been there for like 30 years. So he had called me and said, would you do us a T-shirt for their Halloween design for the show? And I said, yeah.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Every time, like, the longer you look at it, the more amazing little things that you notice and see. And just phenomenal. Like, and I love the little boy, just without fear, holding out his bag for candy.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's pure Halloween to me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love stuff where I'm asked to do the pleasure of being afraid, and you're not afraid. When I was a kid, the first time I saw Frankenstein scared me, but after I saw Bride of Frankenstein, I was on his side. And there's a lot of scary stuff when you're a kid in those movies, especially when you see it the way we used to see it on flickering old TVs. But I was on his side. I always hoped, I hope he wouldn't tear my arm off like that poor dude. But I'm on his side.
Yeah. My son is 6. He's just about to turn 6. And last year, he still is. He's obsessed with Universal Monsters. Specifically, he loves Creature from the Black Lagoon. And last year, I remember he said, "Daddy, I want to watch the movie." And I was like, I knew he's very innocent, and I told him, I go, "It might be a little scary." He's like, "Oh, no, Daddy, I think I can handle it." So we put on the black and white Creature from the Black Lagoon. Within, I want to say, the first 5 minutes, the score alone.
Grant Salter's score is terrifying.
The score and the the way it builds when they find the claw inside, like the claw inside of the rock, he was done. Daddy, turn it off.
Yep.
Turn it off.
Yeah.
And it was so funny to me because I'm like, it's amazing to see through fresh eyes.
Yep.
How scary this stuff really is.
It is, and when for me, I can remember that my parents would go boating at a couple of the lakes we have here, and I had not seen that film. And again, I was a kid. This was around the same time as the Bigfoot thing, and it was on television. And my father liked this kind of stuff. He liked everything, but he had no problem with horror films. And he said, "Hey, this is on." And we had a rule: I could watch whatever, but I couldn't go running in their room saying, you know. So there were some pretty long nights, Tom, where I had to hang it in there, man, because Frankenstein kicked in a door, and I said I wanted to watch this, and that was one of them. And I remember once he said, after I'd seen it, a couple of times we'd go to the lake, and he says, "You're not swimming like you used to. You used to go swimming. Put on your little jacket and go swimming." And I said, I don't want to. And finally, okay, Dad, the odd reason is the creature of the Black Lagoon. And my dad, without missing a beat, goes, "Oh, that's a good reason.
Yeah.
He could be out here. I don't know."
Just making it worse, piling it on.
When you go swimming in a lake or whatever, fish will touch your feet.
Yeah.
You know, they'll come up and they'll just bump you. They'll just see what you are. And I was used to that. Afterwards, if you see the film, he kind of touches her foot, right, when she's swimming at the beginning. And at that point, I said, "I'm never going in that." And just when I was getting better, they made Jaws.
Oh my God, forget it.
I didn't even go into my swimming pool as a kid.
Oh man.
Conspiracy to keep Kelley dry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my dad would push me into the shower, you know.
Yeah. Kelley, it's always an absolute pleasure to have you on. It's such an amazing treat for us. Guys. Yeah, we really appreciate your time. The guys that had to hop off, they wanted me to make sure to let you know that they had to get back to work, but they didn't want to miss the opportunity to hang with you. So thank you so much for helping make this an annual tradition. Let's keep it going.
I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Hopefully, I believe next year we'll have a lot more good stuff. I have a great project coming out with Matt Wagner that is pure Halloween horror. So
beautiful.
Yeah,
we look forward to it.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, thank you so much again, and have a great Halloween, obviously, and the rest of your week and all that.
All right,
and everyone go follow Kelley on Twitter if you aren't already, and possibly, as you were saying before we got on, possibly watch out for you on Instagram.
Yeah, that'll come. That'll be coming up.
Cool.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelley. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you. Take care.